Hey everyone, so today's video, you might already know what it is because I actually gave a hint to this video all the way back 1 month ago during my MCU movie tier list. Well, I was actually planning it to do around early June, but then I realized that the new Pixar movie Luca was actually coming very soon. Now, I couldn't make this last Friday because I would have had a very condensed upload schedule because that movie came out at like 2 p.m. and I ended at like 4. So I opted for another random video that day, but today we're finally here. Pixar movie tier list. Yeah, so you know the drill. There's 24 Pixar movies currently, and this is all the way from release order. And there's obviously a few tiers. Obviously, the top is gonna be the best, and then the bottom it's gonna be like the worst. Obviously, you have God movie, really cool, good masterpiece. S tier, love it, great, also still good. Average is just not too good, but not bad either. Small yikes, kind of a bit of a yikes, and then big yikes, like really bad. And then who signed this off? Like, why would you even have this movie? So, anyways, we're starting off with the very first Pixar movie, the one that started it all, Toy Story, released back in 1995. Now, if I'm being really honest, I'm not too big of a fan of this movie. Like, the premise is quite okay, but I wouldn't necessarily say it's the best. So, in my opinion, this movie is just a staple average. Next up, you have A Bug's Life. Oh my god, A Bug's Life. Like, I know this is all obviously, disclaimer, this is all my opinion. I'm completely biased to some of these movies. So, don't attack me for anything. This is just my opinion. It's obviously gonna be very biased, but A Bug's Life, I also kind of slapped myself to bed in this movie. This was the second Pixar movie in 1998. I watched it a couple of years ago and it was just so boring. Like, I hated every moment of it. Who signed this off? Like, I'm straight up already putting this in the very bottom tier, but that's just how I feel about this movie. Next up, we got Toy Story 2, released in 1999. Obviously, the sequel to the original movie. And I actually love this movie. This movie is quite good. I wouldn't necessarily say it's like a god tier movie, but it's kind of borderlining S tier and great. But you know what? I'm gonna put it in great. I mean S tier. It's really good. And now we enter the 21st century with 2001 movie Monsters Inc. Monsters Inc. Okay. This I'm obviously biased to some of these movies, but this is just straight up going to God movie. It's just one of my favorite Pixar movie. One of my favorite movies probably of all time. It's just such a masterpiece to me. And yeah, that's where it's gonna stand. Next up, we got Finding Nemo. I haven't watched this movie in years. The last time I watched it was when I was still, I don't know, like 6 or 7 years old. So therefore, don't have the greatest memory of it. But I still have quite a few memories. But it's really good. Overall, it's just staple. Great. Right. The next movie we have is The Incredibles. The Incredibles. Oh my god. Alright, I think this might be another one of my hot takes movie. This is probably my biggest hot take on movie ever, but Incredibles, it's still good. Well, you'll see why I have a big hot take, but I honestly still think this is an S tier movie. I only recently watched this movie like a few months ago and it's really good. So S tier it is. Now obviously the Pixar community and the general entire movie community has kind of a vendetta against the Cars series. It's genuinely the most hated series on all of Pixar. For example, go to Rotten Tomatoes, go to all the Pixar movie rankings, and Cars 1, Cars 3, and Cars 2 are the 22nd, 23rd, and 24th movies in the list. It's just the most hated one. But Cars 1, however, it's just obviously I'm really biased towards this movie because I just have so much great memories of it. I love the whole racing aspect to it. And I honestly think that this is a solid S tier movie. Like, obviously, a lot of people will disagree, but I just love the whole entire classic American theme to it on Radiator Springs. And yeah, going to S tier. Next up, Ratatouille. Now, again, this is just like Monsters Inc. This is one of my personal favorite Pixar movies. It's going into God movie because I just love the whole cooking aspect to it, the whole rats running away. It's just kind of my type of movie. Obviously, just a quick warning: this list it's not going to be like if it's to the left, it doesn't mean it's better. This just straight up one tier, not ranking it like from 1 to 24. Next up, oh, we stumble upon Wally, and coincidentally, Wally is also one of my favorite Pixar movies. So I actually only recently watched Wally, but I'm a big fan of like this sci-fi robotic team. It's going to God movie. I don't really need to explain it. It's just one of Pixar's classic masterpieces. But however, Up, oh man, Up, I don't really like Up. Like I know a lot of people really like the emotional aspect to it, especially that beginning scene that's like really emotional about Carl and his wife, the lifelong journey from the 1940s, I guess. They get married, they buy their house, they want to save up to go to this waterfall place. He finally bought the tickets and his wife dies. Yeah, but I'm honestly not a big fan of emotional themes. Like that's why you're about to find out for these future movies. So Up and the whole flying aspect and everything about this movie, I'm personally not a big fan. So I would have to put this in small yikes. So yeah, that's where it's gonna stand. Not a big fan of the movie, but yeah. Toy Story 3. Toy Story 3, it's really good. Just if I'm being really honest, this movie is just great. I really don't have too much to say about it. It's just solid, great movie. Oh, and I just noticed we're now in the 2010s. Cars 2. Oh wow, obviously, this is the most hated movie, Pixar movie by far everyone. Um, because it's just horrible, like this abomination of a movie. Well, for me, I actually like Cars 2, believe it or not, when it first released. I kind of like the whole mixing up of the theme, but when I rewatched it, I just noticed that it's just so messy. It's just messy. There's like this whole spy team mixed with racing team, mixed with traveling, mixed with emotional sob stories, mixed with a bombing. Like what? So yeah, it's just messy for me. I like the whole traveling theme, but it's just messy. And to me, this is currently a big yikes. If I was a kid, I would probably put it in the high tiers. If I was like 5, but no, I'm not 5 anymore. And obviously, I got to find out that it's just not a great movie. It's just really messy. Next up, Brave. Brave is actually a really means a lot to me. This is actually the first movie I watched in the cinemas ever in my life. I'm still young, alright? Obviously, now cinemas are closed, rip cinemas. But Brave, even though it was the first movie I watched in the cinema, I didn't necessarily like this movie when I first watched it. Like, not a big fan of the whole Scottish medieval theme. Obviously, in my opinion, this kind of matches more well with a Disney movie. And in my opinion, Plane should have really been a Pixar movie. But Brave, I honestly have to put it at big yikes again. Again, not a big fan of this movie. Just my opinion. Monsters University. I honestly think this movie is a little bit underrated. A lot of people like to look down on this movie because the first one is so good. Well, it is so good. I I love this movie. I like the whole scaring games theme, and overall, I honestly think it's just great overall. I mean, it's kind of borderlining S tier and great, but it's not as good as these other movies. So I'm gonna have to put it at great. Inside Out. Inside Out to me is probably a really overrated movie. Like it's a kind of like an emotional sob story again, with like a lot of other Pixar movies are aiming for, like the emotions of a child. But I'm not a really big fan of these types of genres. And probably if you ask a person, a lot of times, if you ask like a much more younger person what their favorite Pixar movies are, they're most likely they're probably gonna say like Inside Out, Coco, and Soul. And if you ask an older person, they'll probably say like, I don't know, Monsters Inc. or Ratatouille, Wally, Incredibles. But for me personally, not a big fan of this movie. I'm gonna have to put it in average. It's just the emotional sub story scenes are just way too much for me. Not a big fan of them. So it's gonna have to stay in average tier. The Good Dinosaur. Alright, I watched this movie a couple years ago in school, believe it or not. And this movie, again, I'm my opinion, not a big fan of this movie. This movie is kind of an abomination to me as well. And I honestly just don't know which parts of the movies are good. I just didn't enjoy anything from this movie. Like, kind of similar to the Bugs Life with Brave and Cars 2. At least like a couple parts I still enjoyed. Like Cars 2, I actually enjoyed a lot of parts. It's just the combination of the team that's just not perfect and messy. But this movie, I just couldn't find a single part that I enjoyed, similar to a Bugs Life. So it's going there. It's been about 17 years since the worst Pixar movies in 1998. 17 years later, we get another abomination of a movie that's deserving of the lowest tier. Next up, Finding Dory. Finding Dory. A lot of people also like to look down on Finding Dory. I feel like a lot of people like to look down on a lot of Pixar movie sequels because they're not as good as the first one. But Finding Dory to me is also probably one of the most average movies. It's not as good as Finding Nemo, but I wouldn't necessarily say it's really bad. I honestly think it's just a staple average for this one. So yeah, it's going there. And next up we have Cars 3. Cars 3. A lot of people say it is better than Cars 2. And after rewatching Cars 2, yes, I can definitely say that the theme of the movie is not as messy. Although I enjoyed Cars 2 more than this movie is not as messy. Cars 2 is just, they just mixed up way too much things. But I didn't necessarily enjoy Cars 3, and I just didn't like it. So I might have to put this in small yikes, along with Up. These movies, like Up, I know a lot of people love Up, but I'm so sorry. I'm personally not a big fan of this. And Cars 3, also not a big fan. And we see everything from Small X to Who Signed This Off. Not a big fan of it. Who Signed This Off? I just absolutely hate these movies. Just didn't enjoy it a single bit. So yeah. Next up, we got Coco. Coco is probably the fan favorite Pixar movies. It's the definite definition of everybody's favorite Pixar movie. And I could definitely see why. It's really emotional. It's like has a lot of valuable life lessons about death and obviously the Mexican tradition. And although I would although a lot of times I like to say Coco is overrated, it's still a great movie in the end of the day. And although I don't like these sob stories, Coco just does it really good for me. I wouldn't necessarily say it's a god movie. It's just not one of my personal favorite Pixar movies, but it's definitely 100% going to S tier. Next up, you got Incredibles 2. Probably a lot of people like to say Incredibles 2 is just painfully average because it didn't stand up to Incredibles 1. But I actually really like Incredibles 2. I know it really feels weird, but this is probably, if you didn't see my MC movie tier list, you might have seen that my other movie hot take is that I prefer Age of Ultron to Avengers, and thankfully the Marvel community never actually found that video. But I'm sorry, I gotta have to put this in God tier. It's literally just one of my favorite Pixar movies along with these. I know I'm probably gonna get roasted if this video gets viral, which I really hope it doesn't because yeah, this thing here is just gonna be so painful to a lot of people. And next up we got Toy Story 4. Toy Story 4 released in 2019, just 8 years after Toy Story 3, and I'm definitely underwhelmed. I'm like it's just honestly not in the range of the good, like the Andy trilogy. It's just a completely different movie with just the toys, and I don't really like that, if I'm really honest. Toy Story 4, like if you see on the Pixar timeline, this obviously only happens a few months after Toy Story 3, but the lack of characters that I know and the whole story, I just don't know. I was just so disappointed of this movie after watching it in the cinema. So I'm gonna have to put it in a small yikes again. Sorry to anyone who enjoys this movie, but come on, it's my opinion. You can't just be mad and try to cancel people over movie opinions. Next up, 2020, a movie released in 2020, Onward. Onward was released in March 6th, I believe, for the US, but here in Indonesia, I'm pretty sure it released quite a bit later, and I didn't notice at all. Like when this movie was out, I'm pretty sure we were all under lockdown already. And I actually was looking forward to this movie. I saw it a lot on the trailers. And if this did release in March 6th in this country, and I actually did notice it, this would have been known as the last movie I watched. Like for now, the last time I ever went to a cinema was February 29th for the Sonic movie. But Onward could have that title and would have been special to me. But no, I didn't watch this movie in the freaking cinemas. Instead, I watched it a year later in Disney Plus. So Onward for me, right, that's enough for the backstory, but Onward for me is really just great. I love the whole road trip and the mystical theme. At first, I thought it would be like an S tier movie, but nah, it's really great, and that's just all I had to say. It kind of average will fit here, but average means it's not too good, and I like on and I do really enjoy Onward, and it's not really comparable to these movies for me, so it's going to great. Next up, we have Soul. Soul, the second newest Pixar movie. Now, a lot of people like to say this is really, really good, and I was actually blown away from my expectations. Didn't expect this movie to be good. I thought it'll be just some sort of weird Inside Out type movie where it's just all sob stories, but they managed to make that even more interesting with the Great Beyond, the Great Before, then the coaching kids, and even 22 becoming an actual Pixar character. I mean, it could be anyone since time doesn't work. I'm pretty sure time doesn't work in the Great Before. It could be people like, I don't know, let's say, could be like E from The Incredibles. It could be just anyone, but we don't know yet. And we certainly don't know what happens in the Great Beyond. And obviously, Joe got a second chance in life. And this movie overall is an S tier. Like, I was just blown away from this movie when I watched it. I wasn't expecting much at all, but it was actually really, really good. So that's going to S tier. And finally, the reason why this video was delayed for so freaking long, it's Luca. Luca, in my opinion, it's not too great. It's at first it wasn't too great, but towards the end it was kind of good. Like it was just a little bit underwhelming for me, but there's a lot of aspects to this movie that's really good. Obviously, sea monsters coming into land. They bike with a girl named Julia in Porto Rosso. Obviously, the town where everyone just hates sea monsters and try to hunt them down. But this movie, in my opinion, is just really kind of like there's just the good aspects, like the race is just so good, but there's some parts where are just bad. So like it's kind of like the good parts are like so good for me, but the bad parts are like kind of bad. So it's kind of borderlining average and great, but I don't really want to disrespect this movie as much as Inside Out. So I also think it's a hot great. And that is it. That is my Pixar movie tier list. Let me know your opinions, and definitely a lot of people are gonna disagree with me with in this list because it especially Incredibles 2 being this high up, or Inside Out being this low, Cars being this high up, Monsters University being this high up, Finding Nemo being a little bit low, Toy Story being up, Toy Story 1 being a little down, or maybe Toy Story 4 a little down, or Up a little down, or maybe even A Bug's Life. Probably a lot of people enjoyed The Bug's Life, but overall, it's just all my opinion. I'm obviously biased to some movies. Alright, so it's all my opinion. Obviously, I'm very, very biased to some of these movies. But yeah, it's just this obviously all not because of how good the movie is. Obviously, that's a big factor, but it's also how I actually enjoyed the movie when I watched it in the cinema. A movie can be really great, but if it's not my type of genre and I didn't enjoy it every time I watch it, then it's not gonna go to the highest tiers. That's just how I treat a tier list nowadays. So yeah, that is my tier list. If you did enjoy this video, make sure to leave it a like and subscribe. Have a nice day, everyone. Goodbye.